My name is Claudia von Draber. I am the Executive Director and Chief Curator of KODA. And today we have a pleasure of partnering up with Fine Art Donations and with Clanci to deliver this amazing lecture. So welcome. And KODA, just briefly about KODA. So most of you know, I see familiar faces. KODA is a social practice residency for mid-career artists. We do residencies, exhibitions, and arts education programs. And we're opening our Governor's Island season on May 17th. So very soon there will be an opening reception at 3 to 5 p.m. And you're all welcome to join if you're in New York. About Clanci. So I'm just so excited to be partnering up on this event and learning more about fine art donations and strategic planning for artist legacies. So Clanci Jo Conover is an independent curator and an eclectic arts professional with curatorial experience at institutions such as Sotheby's Institute of Art and the Spirits Museum. Clanci has lectured at the College of William and Mary and collaborated with art galleries and collections nationwide, and brings expertise in cataloging, collections management, and relationship building with the art sector. Clanci, welcome, and the floor is yours. I'm just going to ask everybody to stay on mute. We will have a chance to interact, and also this session is being recorded, and we're going to publish it later on KODA's YouTube. So Clanci, welcome, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is awesome to see you all here, and I'm really excited for this presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We can get started. And here we go. So like Claudia said, we are here to discuss artist legacies and strategic donation. And I'm going to just go ahead and give you guys a quick agenda so that you all know kind of what's in store. We pretty much covered introduction. I think Claudia gave me a really, really nice intro, so thank you for that. But then we'll get into inventory maintenance and legacy planning, strategic donation and expanding reach, strategic donation and financial benefits, examples of past donations that I've helped facilitate, just so you guys have an idea of, where we placed work and how we did it. And then we'll do a little interactive lesson to kind of get our brains moving on ideas of where certain pieces of art could go, what kind of museums they would best fit in. And then we'll open it up for questions and get out of here. So I want to thank you all for joining me during this art week. I know it's a pretty crazy time in the art world for a lot of people, especially in New York. So I'm glad that you guys could take the time to be here. I want to start off by saying I am not a museum professional, nor am I a tax expert. My goal for this talk is to get you to think about how your artistic legacy will be remembered and consider how donating to museums could impact that legacy. Since launching Fine Art Donations, I've learned a lot, and I'm really eager to share some of that info with you guys. So that's what we're going to do today. Here's just a quick overview of my past experience. Fine Art Donations is the platform that kind of brought me here to speak with you guys today. It's essentially, show this here. It was founded to connect collectors and estates with museums and streamline the process of donating artwork to institutions. So now, instead of having to contact dozens of institutions in order to find a new home for an artwork donation, donors can just list their work on our platform and museums can check back regularly to see what's there. We also reach out to the museums when we know, oh, hey, this New York Museum is looking for artists who are working around the Buffalo area, and we just got a new piece in by a Buffalo artist. We should probably share it with them and make sure they're aware that it exists. So that is basically what we do. We launched the platform last year, and we've donated 36 pieces to 7 museums and counting. So we are really excited to keep growing this platform and moving art around the country. So I know you guys already put your location in the chat, but if you would share, I guess your names kind of are already attached, but if you would share what brought you here today, and if there's anything in particular you are hoping to learn, that would be awesome. And then I will also ask you guys to write down either on your phone or a piece of paper somewhere if you have ever donated artwork to a museum or if you've considered donating or if you've tried and they wouldn't work with you. That's also a situation that happens. So if you could write that down, or if you haven't ever considered this, why do you think that's something that hasn't come up for you? We'll circle back to this question down the road and open it up for discussion, but I just kind of want you guys to be thinking about that. So, what to record when you are building an inventory? When you're thinking about your legacy planning, an inventory, an archive of your work, your practice, your experience is so, so important. I have done a lot of archival work getting artist databases and records organized, and when we are going back decades, there are almost always cases where information has been lost, whether that is a sales record, exhibition history, publication feature. It is important to keep that information on hand. The best way to do this is by keeping an updated inventory where you can record practically everything about your artwork and your career. Um, some of you may already have a database that you work with, and if you do, amazing. Thank you on behalf of curators and archivists everywhere for doing that. Now, what do you include? What is important to keep in mind? What is important to keep around? Obviously, your standard tombstone info is always important. Place of creation, exhibition or publication history, current artwork location, also keeping a record of where that artwork has been. So that is part of the exhibition history, but also just having a log. So maybe it was made in your studio in Brooklyn, but then it went to storage in Queens, and then it went to an exhibition in Texas, whatever the case may be. It's always helpful to just keep that information on hand. Um, Sales information is equally important. So if you make a sale, you really want to keep your client's contact information on hand or the buyer's contact information on hand if you can, because say in 20 years you're going to do a retrospective and you really want to include that work. You need to have a way to get in touch with that collector. They may have sold the piece, they may have donated the piece, they have that right, but it's at least a starting point to figure out where your work is and if it can be included in that show. So this is really, really helpful, for different exhibition opportunities. Also for publication. Imagine if you didn't have a great image of that piece that was so iconic for you and it's low res and it was taken in 2000 on a 35 millimeter slide, then you probably want to get an updated photo. So having that collector's information important. Descriptions and context. This to me is one of the most key parts of keeping your archive up to date and complete because we can't we can't make up what you were thinking at that time. What were you thinking when you started this series or this piece? Where were you mentally, physically, financially, spiritually? What brought you to the material you're using? What snags did you encounter along the way? Were there any challenges you didn't expect? This info helps contextualize your work, and you might not be as eloquent describing it in 10 years. So just writing down little blurbs about what you're thinking and what you're experiencing and where you're at while you're creating can be really, really helpful for preserving that legacy. And then, of course, archival material and ephemera. Keep your CV updated, obviously. Get photos of not just your work, but you creating that work, your studio, works in progress, even storage spaces. It's great to just have that imagery as archival reference points. So, how do you make an inventory? I'm sure some of you already have this under control, but I just wanted to touch on a few different options that I've come across in my work. There's obviously artwork databases, and when you think of ArtLogic, it's pretty prohibitively expensive. Galleries use it a lot, but some are just very high costs. The ones I've listed here are geared towards artists and have much more attractive pricing structures. The lease here, you can have up to 50 objects free. I'm sure that you guys have more work than that, but maybe if you just wanted to create a database for paintings only, that could be a free option for you. There are also open source databases. These are primarily used for museums, and you do need a hosting platform to be able to set them up, but they can kind of give more control if you're tech savvy. I've never worked with them, and I am not tech savvy enough, but for any of you who are, they might be a good option. The Google Drive is something I have used quite a bit in creating different databases, and I'm just going to share one with you. This artist is named Marcia Widener. She was a fiber and paper making artist out on Long Island, and her family hired me to go through all of her files, all of her papers, and create an archive for her. I asked them, the fear that I have when creating an artist database is what happens if someone stops paying for it? What happens if I signed up for that database and I put all of this time into updating it, cataloging everything, including all the documentation, but then I stop paying and all of that work and all of that information is lost. So we did this through the Google Drive because it's free and it allegedly will be here forever. So here's how we kind of divided up the different material. Docs is like actual Google documents that I have text in, document scans. We have lots of artwork checklists, group shows, press, two-person shows, exhibition install shots. And then artwork is really the meat of it. So this spreadsheet is where we've cataloged all of her different types of work and created links. The images kind of take a long time to load because there's a lot of them, but for each work, it has its own assigned folder with the correlating image and any information that's important to know about that piece. So anybody can go back and use this database that needs to reference Marcia's work. Um, and yeah, so it's a really great tool and anybody can do it. It's free. And that's just one method of cloud-based no cost inventory that you can do. Obviously, it does have that 15 gigabyte limit. So that's something to be aware of if you have really large image files. But otherwise, this is a great resource. And OneDrive could do similarly if you prefer working with that. The other area is paper record keeping. This makes me nervous because we know that paper can get lost or shuffled or, I don't know, destroyed. So I don't love this option personally as an archivist. However, if you are a more tactile artist and you know that keeping some kind of paper card index or binder system would be the best way for you to actively keep your records updated, then do it. Don't try and force yourself into a digital platform that just does not work for you and hinders your workflow because it's better to have a really thorough, great paper record than a really bleak and undeveloped digital record. This is a resource I came across that I just wanted to share with you all while thinking about inventory management. It's a worksheet, and I think that we'll drop the link in the chat to this so you can print it out. And it's multiple steps that just kind of helps you figure out the best way to create your inventory. And it also helps think of budgeting for that inventory and whatever, you'll need to be able to pay for that. So I think it's a nice resource for you if this is something you need. So some of you might be thinking, well, I'm not really that old, so I'm not sure legacy planning is something to worry about. I'm here to tell you it is never too early to think about your legacy. Some of the artists from recent history we know and love today had someone somewhere championing their work, whether it was them, a partner, a gallerist, you name it. So who better to craft that lasting narrative around your art than you, right? So just thinking about these questions at the bottom, how do you want to be remembered? What impact are you hoping to make with your art? And what steps have you taken to make these things happen? So, strategic donation, what we came to talk about. Um, Donating to museums has many, many different benefits for the community, for you. It's there's just a lot to talk about here. So what steps can you take to ensure that you and your artwork have that lasting impact and can be felt for years to come? That would be donating to public institutions. Obviously, there are other ways, but this is one avenue that could be available to you and essentially help expand the contributions and the presence of art across the country. Um, so it is worth considering the fact that many museums have limited budgets and some have absolutely no acquisitions fund at all. So they rely entirely on loans and donations to create exhibitions. Contemporary art is a reflection of our past, our present, and our future. It's a gateway to understanding and personal growth. Museums with little to no acquisitions budgets are limited in their options for presenting new work by contemporary artists, especially if drawing from the collection. So, strategically placing your work in museums across the country can be an amazing way to give back to diverse communities and expand horizons. Um, so, that all to say, here are a list of reasons that it's great to donate your work. Enhancing visibility is so important for your career. You want people in different states to see your work. You don't only want it to be right here in New York if that's where you're working. Likewise, if you're working in Atlanta, you want people in other places to see your work. And of course, exhibitions can offer that opportunity, but museums are another really great way to formalize your presence in a different place. That being said, it is a professionally recognized venue for your work to be displayed. Not only is it a professional venue, you might be able to get your work hung alongside some other important artists. Imagine being hung next to Carmen Herrera. That would be very cool for your profile. You know, that's an install image that you can use to promote yourself. So you might not have an opportunity like that working at a small gallery. It encourages conversation around your particular contributions to cultural heritage and community building. So that is just a really fantastic way to say your art has meaning. Your art contributes to our cultural dialogue. We need to spread it around. We need to share the love. There are communities all over the country that need to be a part of this, that need to hear about the work that you're doing, and donating to museums can do that. You obviously will also educate the public and potentially elevate your own market. So, if you are a fiber artist, for example, and you get your work in a few museum collections, then collectors might start to take note of that. And they might start to look at other fiber artists as well. So, this is something to consider is how expanding your presence in museum collections might impact not just your market, but the market for similar artists or styles. So this is just my quick where, what, when, why. What do you think about when you approach a museum with a donation, right? So first off, where are you trying to bring this work? If you are from New York, obviously, maybe start with New York, but we know that New York is very dense with artwork and artists, so thinking outside the box might prove a little easier to get your work into institutions. Many universities have amazing art museums, so considering if your university that you graduated from, if you did go to art school, do they have a collection? And could you start with that? If not, what town are you from? Is there an institute there that you have some connection to where you might be able to approach them? So really trying to come up with a reason for you being connected to that location when you're first approaching this conversation. If you already have work in museums, that's a bit of a different topic because you can use that when you're speaking to other curators to say, well, you know, I have museum collections represented XYZ. I would love to join your collection as well. So that's a little different. What are museums looking for? This is the most challenging question. This is what I've been working to figure out. Every time we meet a new museum, they often have different collecting goals and limitations, such as storage or hanging space. You know, some installations just will not be able to fit into galleries that have, you know, limitations on where they can hang things or how they can put things on the wall, etc. So that is always something to consider. But why are you approaching that museum? What is the reason? Um, so think about, all right, I'm going to give an example. Say you are from Georgia, you're from rural Georgia, and you really want to get a piece of work into the High Museum. We're aiming high with that one. They have a huge collection and they probably are not wanting for that much. But let's just say it's the High Museum. So find a link you have to some of the artists in the collection. Find a link you have to some of the exhibition topics that they've been going over, you know, and include that when you're reaching out to the curator. So say, you know, I've been working on XYZ, I've done this in my career, and I really think that that positions me to be a great addition for your collection. I also have been studying the work of this person who inspires me greatly and is a big influence on my art. And I see that you have a number of pieces by them in your collection. So it would be really fantastic to get me in there so that, you know, I could be in conversation with that artist who's inspired, you know, this whole series of work. So things like that are really important to consider. When is also very important. Currently, obviously, a lot of museums are in deep turmoil with the current administration yanking their funding left and right. So I have been aware of that with me reaching out with donation opportunities for museums in the last few months. So prior to this year, I was, you know, emailing willy-nilly, trying to get contacts built, trying to reach out to these museums and see how we could help them. But now that things are a little more hectic, I'm trying to be more respectful of the museum resources and the museum's time. It's also important to know if, you know, there's a big staff change going on, if there's a new exhibition going up, because if you know that the museum is closed for 2 weeks or their main galleries are closed because they're setting up a new show, maybe that's not the time to reach out with your donation. So just trying to be aware of the museum and their resources. And then why? We kind of talked about this in the what, but why is your work a good fit for the collection and how does it connect to the local community? That's another way that you can really sell yourself to museums because why are museums there? Yes, to be kind of temples of knowledge and culture, but also to benefit the community, to provide cultural opportunities and artistic experiences. So, how could your donation reach the community in a more profound way? If you can formalize those things, it's a great start for the conversation with curators. All right, strategizing donations, community impact. So, obviously, there are a lot of ways that your donation could impact communities, but I've just listed a few to kind of give us some ideas. Enhancing cultural understanding and appreciation. This broadens perspectives, enriches education, promotes inclusivity. When museum collections reflect the diversity of the communities they serve, it can be a greater sense of belonging and representation for individuals who might otherwise feel excluded from mainstream cultural institutions. This can encourage broader participation and engagement. So, boom, that is one way that you've impacted the communities by making them feel seen. Fostering creativity and inspiration. Encountering different artistic techniques, materials, and concepts can inspire creativity and innovation in visitors of all ages. Museums are spaces for personal discovery and the development of individual artistic expression. So, contributing to this overall mission really helps the greater community with their own creativity. If they see that you did this, then they can imagine something for themselves. They might not be artists, but it's the idea of dreaming bigger. Strengthening community engagement and social cohesion. A lot of this kind of feeds into each other, as obviously this kind of relates to the enhancing cultural understanding aspect. But I want to talk a little more about the contributing to economic vi vitality. My apologies. Is that one, your donation could make the museum, have a higher leg in the contemporary arts world, right? So they could be really excited to say, hey, we have this new piece that was created 6 months ago by this artist that grew up just a town over. How cool is that? And that, is a talking point for them. So it can be a way to attract tourism and provide museums with a way to enhance the quality of life of their participants. So there's just so many different ways that contributing to museums can impact the communities that they serve. And it's not a small thing. All of this stuff is really important. And if you are actively contributing, you can feel great about that. I mean, I am not trying to get up on a soapbox, but it is bigger than you, essentially. So here is a case study I wanted to share with you guys. Helen Gerardia was a mid-century abstractionist. She wasn't part of the New York School. She wasn't part of the op art group. And she wasn't really a cubist either, but she had this really cool style of geometric abstraction. And not that many people are familiar with her today. If any of you are, please let me know in the chat. I would love to find that out. But essentially, while she was alive, she exhibited in all 50 states, had 120 solo exhibitions, and her artwork was placed in the collections of over 40 US museums. So even though she might not be the most important artist today, she is still available. Her work is in all of these museums to be referenced and seen and showed. Here is a list of some of the museums that her work is in. It's a really, really impressive. She died in 1988, so she did all of this well before the internet was available. It wasn't just her that was donating works, although she did donate her own work to a number of museums. But she had collectors who donated, and some of the museums purchased her work. So it was kind of a mix. I have a sneaking suspicion that one of the collectors whose name is on the credit line for a lot of these institutions might have been a lover, question mark, but I need to do more research. I'm not 100% sure. We'll find that out eventually, maybe if we're lucky. So the reason that I bring up Helen Gerardia is because in the last 5 years, she has been on view in Reno, Nevada, Reading, Pennsylvania, Shelburne, Vermont, Asheville, North Carolina, and Provo, Utah. That's pretty incredible for somebody that is not well known. She was a founding member of this artist group called Vectors, and I looked into some of the other founding members to see how their career fared, how their legacy held up today, and it was a very stark contrast. We have all of these women artists over here who helped found the Vectors Artist Group, were working in the 50s and 60s in New York. And they have very little museum representation and no recent exhibition history, at least that I could find. So just looking at this comparison, you can see that Gerardia's representation in these places all across the country has resulted in her being brought to the contemporary attention and included in these conversations, placed alongside other artists and group shows where people can still go out and see her work almost 40 years after she passed. So this, I think, is a really, really great example of why it's important to get your work into public museums. So I would love to open it up to you all and see if we can do some unmuting and discussion here and have you share how you think donating can benefit artists, museums, and the greater art world. There are no wrong answers here at all. I'm just curious if, you guys have any thoughts that you would like to share on this topic.
I've had experience donating as like part of like at the end of a residency, it was part of kind of the requirement to give the work, to give a work. And um, but I need to make money. So I I don't usually approach I'm starting with I want to sell this work. And I did go to I recently was invited to give a visiting artist lecture at my alma mater, and I went to Cornell for undergrad. And so when I was there, met with the librarians that were collecting artist books. And then I also met with the museum. They have a museum on campus, and I met with that director. And the library, like they bought like a very inexpensive book. But I was trying to push the more expensive one. Um, and so they thought that maybe that they could take it with the rare books. And so then I ended up, I'm hopeful that the museum is going to actually buy it. But if they don't buy it, like I am considering donating it, because I just want my work to be in the collection. I see the value of, otherwise it's just going to be in my studio.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
resent, I mean, I have to make, money. So I resent having to give my work away for free too.
I completely understand where you're coming from, and I've heard this from artists before. Obviously, you want institutions to be able to purchase your work. It validates you and it helps create your market, and you have to eat, right?
Yeah.
So obviously that is a priority. But unfortunately, the reality with, and I'm thinking more, right now I'm talking more about small museums that have little to no acquisitions fund. They really just don't have the option to purchase your work. The Met does, the Whitney does, right? So I would very much kind of be hesitant to gift things to museums like that because they do have an acquisitions fund. But you know, the alternative here is you don't want it sitting in storage either. And I know a lot of artists end up with inventory that they've had for years, and that's not to devalue that inventory, but if you have, 10 paintings that are just sitting there and they're not selling, maybe one can go to a museum, and then maybe you will start to sell those other 9 paintings because you have a new talking point. You can say, look at this. My piece is in a museum. It's going on display in this show next to this artist. And I have 9 more of those paintings that are available for sale at my studio or at my gallery. So that's, just one way to try and build your reach and help in that way. But I absolutely understand, the challenge of course, we want museums to buy our art, of course. But the reality and our expectations don't always align. And I also like to think about how these smaller museums in different locales, they get your art outside of major metropolis areas where, you know, everybody is kind of competing for attention and it gives you a little bit more of a spotlight. So that's just something to think about. Does anybody else want to chime in about the benefits of donating if you have any ideas about how that could be helpful to artists, museums, the art world? All right, we can go ahead and move on.
Yes, I have
Oh,
something related to that.
mhm.
Hold on, so I can make myself more visible.
Thank you for sharing, guys, too. I really, really appreciate it.
This is excellent and informative. I love it. Thank you so much. I am sitting right now in a city that has something called what is it called? The Western Reserve Archives. And they came up with are you familiar with it? It's in
I'm
Cleveland.
not.
And they devised a way to maintain art by local artists by purchasing a property that the artists, if selected by a particular board or staff, can then purchase space in. They have to be approved in the same way that a museum would approve of the work that goes in there. So it's not open to everybody.
Hmm.
Uh, But nonetheless, it seems I read something in the maybe it was a Wall Street Journal or something years ago that said this was the only project like that. In a way, it makes me think of the way cemeteries function. You buy a grave.
Mhm.
So it's a grave of art, and they put it on exhibition. They recycle it so that those individuals in that collection get a show periodically and also appear in group shows. And the work is always being archived and studied because it does have local relationships to other artists. And that cataloging goes on. So, what do you think of that?
I think that's very interesting. I mean, I would love to look it up and learn a little bit more about it, but that's really interesting. I mean, I've never heard of that, and I think, I would have to look into it more. I feel that it could be a really interesting opportunity. Do you know if it's just like a one-time fee, or do you pay like rent continuously to be in this space?
Oh, it's a one-time fee, just like a
Yeah.
grave. And it's called the Western Reserve Artists Archives. And I've been in touch with them because normally one has to buy into it, but they're interested in my mother's work,
Mhm.
which I ended up spending more coming back to my birth town from New York City to figure out. I've just been stuck here. My life and my community has been elsewhere, but I ended up doing something similar to that archive, but accidentally because I had access to an entire to a building. And I just decided since my mother's work didn't sell throughout most of her life, even though she was very, very well known and locally, um, I just took a floor in that building and made a museum, or I don't call it an
Wow.
archive, a viewable archive, but I've been operating without funding and
Hmm.
and now it's time for, well, anyway, to make a long story short, the archives, because of their interest, they were raising money to uh, for the space that would hold my mother's work, whose name is Virgie Patton. And we shall
You're based
see.
in
Those,
Ohio?
say that again.
Are you based in Ohio?
I am not. My body is, but
I,
if we
yeah,
have
no,
my
I
mother.
was just looking at the website. It says it's for Ohio-based artists.
Yeah, and there's a project called Let It Be Archive. That's what I call it because there was an abandoned lot that goes with the building. So anyway, that is a archive of trees that have been
Amazing.
plants being
No,
planted.
this is really, really interesting. I'm definitely curious to learn more, but that, might end up in my next talk. I'm not sure, but the legacy component of that is really interesting where, for some artists, it's true, it might be incredibly hard to get into a museum, maybe if you don't have a lot of exhibition history, but you know that you've, done a lot of work that's impacted a community, for example, and you want to be represented in that community that could be a good avenue. So I'm very, very curious to learn more. Thank you for bringing that to us. That's really interesting.
Yeah, you can feel free to get in touch with me. Do you want my number?
Yeah, I'll follow up. We'll have Claudia share
Okay, I'll put it
it.
in the chat. And
Awesome.
thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you. Awesome. All right. I really appreciate you all sharing and interacting. I love talking. This is a collaborative kind of conversation. So thank you guys. Now I'm not gonna spend too much time on this. I did have some scenarios that I worked out, but everybody's tax situation is just so wildly different. I decided against sharing that. So I wanted to talk about the difference between donating your own work and donating work by others. Unfortunately, with our current tax codes, if you donate your own work, you basically can't deduct the value of that work as the artist of the piece. You can deduct the cost of the materials if you're not already doing that, which you definitely should be. But if for some reason you haven't been deducting the cost of your materials or taking those itemizations, you can add that for your donation. Shipping costs are also a business expense, so you could write that off. But that's pretty much where the buck ends, unfortunately, for artists and financial benefits that are direct. Obviously, we talked a little bit about how having your work in a museum could elevate your market, but directly, there's not a whole lot of tax benefit to donating your work, unfortunately. If you happen to have work by other artists that you would be interested in donating, you can get that tax benefit. So, you might be trading work with another artist and you've had it for a while and you just don't really have a good spot for it. Maybe a museum would be a wonderful home. Um, and I want to just share a little bit of nitty-gritty on that with you is that if you donate a work of art that you've had in your possession for more than a year to a qualifying public charity, you can deduct up to 30% of your adjusted gross income. So we're not going to get too bogged down in all of those details, but a qualifying public charity is essentially an art museum. If you were to donate, a work of art to a Rotary Club for them to put in their meeting space, that it's not a qualified charity because their mission is not to display artwork and share it with the public. So that kind of has to be a portion of it. And then I put together a little scenario. So let's say you're making $20,000 a year. I hope we're making more, but I just made it a small number so it's easy. After you get to deduct half of your self-employment tax, if that's applicable to you, you're making a little bit over 18,500 on your AGI. 30% of that would be over $5,000. So if you donate a work of art that's valued at $5,000, you can deduct the full amount of that from your federal, possibly state taxes. I'm not as familiar with state. And again, I'm not a tax expert, so definitely consult your accountant. Um, Everyone's particular tax situation is different, so it is hard to give advice that can apply across the board. Again, I highly recommend discussing any potential donations with a tax professional to learn how that donation could alleviate your taxes. So, another part of that is that if you are donating a work of art valued at $5,000 or more, the IRS dictates that it must be formally appraised within a certain time frame around the donation date. So for works below $5,000, you typically do not need that official appraisal. This is a stipulation that can and has deterred potential donors. Imagine if you had inherited a work by, let's say, Lynn Drexler from your grandma who used to vacation on Monhegan Island. It's now well worth five figures, if not more, possibly, and you want to donate it and get the appropriate tax benefit, but an appraiser wants to charge thousands of dollars to get the valuation you need to get that deduction. So you're not really willing to ante up thousands of dollars for something you're trying to donate. So a lot of people end up not donating or selling. I have found that there are alternatives to very costly appraisers. And while I have not used them myself, I found them when I was looking for solutions to this conundrum. Of course, there are always benefits to working with a private appraiser or firm, but they can be cost prohibitive for many people. So appraisally seems like the best option. They are all USPAP compliant and they do specific preparations for appraisals for the IRS and they say that they are IRS compliant. So in my opinion, that's probably the best place to start. But there's also another one I found called Value My Stuff that is a little more budget friendly. And they boast that they have former experts from Christie's and Sotheby's on staff. I would have to look into it more, and I would recommend looking into it more to make sure that whatever appraisal they give you would be accepted by the IRS. So these are just some quick alternatives to the high cost appraiser. Now, very quickly, I just want to go over some of the donations that we have helped facilitate in the last year so that you can get an idea of how we made it happen and why the museums were interested. We don't have a ton of time, so I think I'm just going to stick with these two. So Marcia Widener, I showed you her archive earlier. I worked with her family and they had all of this work and a lot of it was kind of installation slash exhibition based. So it wasn't necessarily something to put in your house. I mean, this is a 58-inch hanging hand sewn paper yarn dress. So where would you put that in a house? It doesn't make a lot of sense in most places. So what I did was I thought, well, Marcia is an artist of handmade paper. Are there any paper museums? And it turns out there are. The Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking is at, I believe, Georgia Tech in Atlanta. And they are looking for paper-based work, not drawings on paper, but things created out of paper. And so I reached out to them and we facilitated 5 donations of her work to that museum, which was really exciting because now she is represented in the South. She was never in a public collection in the South until now. So this is really fantastic. And then Richard Mock, this lino cut, he was a New York artist, but he actually found his love of the lino cut while he was stuck on someone's couch in Houston with no money. And we found this museum. I don't even know how they discovered us, but they reached out and they said they were really interested in a couple pieces, and they are entirely volunteer run from the board to the docents. If you call their landline, it says our hours are Thursday through Sunday if we have a volunteer available to open the doors. Like it really is just this super community-based space. Eastland, Texas is an entire county and it has about 20,000 people in it. And this is pretty much the only museum there. So this was the first fine art that they have ever received for their collection. And we've got them a number of different works that were all Texas-based. But the point here is that there's there's museums all over the country that are really looking to grow, that are looking for particular themes or styles or mediums, like the papermaking museums. So you really got to get creative and see what's out there. Quickly, I'll just mention the Taubman donation. They have no acquisitions budget at all. And they're trying to put together a 75th anniversary exhibition for next year. We got them some donations. They will be on view next year in that show. So it's really cool to be able to help the donors, but also to be able to help these museums grow their collection in the way that they want. Okay. So we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to save this for the end and just quickly go through our sample lessons, and then we'll open it up for questions. So I was going to have you guys provide some answers, but I'm just going to go ahead and share my thoughts. One institution might be a good fit for something like this interactive large-scale piece by Delcy Morelos. Morelos creates art that calls attention to connections between people and the environment. Using natural materials like textile, fibers, clay, and soil, her work asks us to consider Earth as a living entity rather than a territory to be owned. So, of course, what comes to mind for me is a museum near the border. I'm thinking the Tucson Museum of Art. I'm thinking the El Paso Museum of Art. I'm thinking maybe even a natural history museum because they tend to be large. This incorporates organic material from our Earth, and it questions themes of migration and territory, which are all related to the natural history topics. So that is kind of where I would start with on a piece like this. And then we have another piece by Delita Martin, who is an Afro-Cubist. The African diaspora is a big inspiration for her and is featured, different African motifs are featured in her work as an American. So my thought, obviously, I go kind of high with this one with the Studio Museum, but I think that her work would fit into their collection incredibly well with their history of championing Black artists. But then I also think maybe the Mississippi Museum of Art. I'm thinking an area where there's a lot of diversity and a large Black population. But we're talking about the African diaspora. Right here in Brooklyn, we have the Museum of Contemporary African Diasporan Art. So maybe that could be a good place for it. So really just trying to brainstorm and broadening how you're thinking of the museums that exist and trying to go a little deeper to find out who's out there and what they're looking for. Okay, this is the last thing I will say before we open it up for discussion. As I mentioned earlier, currently there is no tax benefit really for donating your work to a museum, but the Artist Museum Partnership Act would change that. Our government is in shambles, so I'm not sure how likely it is that we can do anything about this right now. But if you're passionate about it, if you have any connections in the political world, even outside of that, if you can share this information with your fellow artists, This would make it so that you would have an incentive as an artist financially to donate your work to a museum. And it would in turn allow museums to have more contemporary art and more access to things being made recently. So I think we have links to drop in the chat for those. You can find your representative and give them a call about this, and you can learn more at New York Artists Equity. So thank you guys for letting me ramble on that long. I would like to open it up for questions, comments, if you guys wanted to share if you have donated before or not. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you. And if not, we can all go home and have lunch.
Please go ahead, Mona Lisa.
Yeah, thanks for that. You did a great job of talking through the why. I was interested in hearing you talk a little bit more about the how. My works are in a collection, and it happened such that there was an approach, but I have not done so proactively. And typically, it seems like there's a person in the middle or some other kind of introduction if you're not approached directly. If you could talk about that a little bit, I would be grateful.
Yeah, thank you for that question because I did mean to touch on this a little bit more. So thank you. There are different ways. Obviously, if you have a relationship with a curator already, if you know a curator, that's a really great starting place, but that is not true for everybody. Or you might just not have a relationship where you feel like you can reach out. So other ways that you could do this would be to have a representative reach out on your behalf. And eventually at Fine Art Donations, we will have a pathway for artists to work with us directly. We don't have that right now, simply because you don't get the tax benefit and we're not trying to take your money. So we're still working that out. But before that is available, thinking about, do you have a gallery you've shown with before? Do you have an independent curator that you've worked with? Is there an arts organization or residency program you've worked with? Somebody from one of those places might be able to be your liaison and be your representative. So, if there's a curator that's organized an exhibition at a gallery for you in the past, asking if they would be willing to reach out to a potential museum contact that they have because you are passionate about getting your work into a museum could be a really, really great way to start that conversation. You can also do it yourself, but it's really unpredictable how the museums are going to respond. Bigger museums typically don't love being approached by artists, unfortunately. But for example, the Eastland County Museum in Texas would probably be thrilled for a Texas artist to approach them with some kind of donation, especially if, you're established and it's not just a local hobby art piece. So something like that might be a way where you could reach out directly. University art galleries are also really great. So if you had one that you were associated with, calling them up would be good. In my particular case, I'm not really a visual artist, but there is a nice museum that opened since I graduated my school in Virginia at Christopher Newport University, but they don't have a permanent collection. So that's not a place that I could bring art. However, I could reach out to them and say, hey, I'm a former graduate. I know that the exhibition space doesn't have a permanent collection, but I'm really interested in getting my work into a permanent collection. Is there anybody you know or any introduction you can make to help me in that quest? Same goes for reaching out to faculty that you may have a good relationship with. So you can always do it yourself. You can always initiate that conversation yourself. But if you have, a representative, a go-between that has some kind of credentials in the art world, in the academic world, that's another great way to go about it.
Oh, I would like to say something.
Please.
Okay, I wrote this whole thing. I've donated most of my work to the Smithsonian Archive. And well, I was very active in the 70s and early 80s. I became a writer and my art became secondary after that. So I have a lot of leftovers. I have my three-dimensional work because the Smithsonian has my drawings, collages, photos, prints. And the Met, I'm also in the Met and MoMA collections. But I feel like what I have left are leftovers, and I don't really know how to go about getting them anywhere.
You know, that's a good question, and I feel like that is a bit of a challenge. What I would think about is I know that there are some institutions that have like the Tang Teaching Museum. Um, they have programs where they use artwork to educate the students and use it as examples. We made a donation to the James Madison University art collection, and we learned that there they like representative states. So like if you have a print and you did, some samples, state one, state two, state three, and then you have the final thing, they would love to see the works in progress and the draft material that led to the final piece. So there are a lot of, educational based, university based, teaching type of collections that I think are the best to approach for kind of the bits and bobs, the ephemera. It's still going to be challenging, don't get me wrong, but I think that that is, a really great way to have that work still be impactful and still be, appreciated by the community that it serves.
And how would I find teaching museums?
Great question. I Google a lot. I do a lot of research on Google. I will tell you, like I said, the Tang Museum in New York, they are an active teaching museum and they use their collection in that mission. And I think that's really fantastic. But there are some other smaller ones as well as art libraries. So I know that Berkeley has one. They have a graphic art library where faculty and students can check out up to 2 pieces a semester to put in their dorms or in their homes. And something like that could also potentially be an interesting outlet for the less prime works.
Hmm. So art libraries, is that?
They're not super popular, but I know there's one in Berkeley and there's one in Akron, Ohio. But if you can turn up more, they also might be a great avenue for some particular donations.
Okay. I mean, I have lots of artist books that are in collections all over the world.
Wonderful.
I don't know exactly where they are. I mean, I know where a few of them are, but
Sure. And that is something that I did not talk about at all is international donations because we haven't really branched into that. But I will say that there are a number of international museums that have Friends of branches, which is like the American Friends of the Louvre or whatnot. And that is a 501(c)(3) registered in America that provides donations for a museum like the Louvre. So obviously, again, I don't think that that is necessarily a museum to be approaching. They are monolithic, but to find that as an alternative too. Sorry, it's a little bit of a side note, but I did want to mention that.
yeah, because I do have collections international. I am in collections internationally, but I don't think they'd want more.
Well, you never know until you ask, right?
Mm.
We are
Yeah.
at time, just being mindful of everybody's commitment to this lecture. I do appreciate everybody joining and so much engagement in the chat and also so many questions. I feel, Clancy, that we need another session with you. So let's discuss that for the future. And this one will be recorded. It has been recorded, will be on our on KODA's YouTube channel. Clancy's contact information is on the slide, but also in the chat. Thank you so much, everybody, once again. And Clancy, thank you so much for doing this amazing lecture for us.
Yes, thank you all so much. Please feel free to reach out to my email, DM me on Instagram, however you like to communicate. I would love to keep in touch with you guys and continue the conversation.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.